Chapter 9 The Everlasting Shoes. One night Scheherazade arrived in the king's bedchamber, only to find him already asleep. Thinking she had come late and missed her opportunity to tell a story, she crept under the covers and lay in the hollow of the king's arm, searching the beehive cells of her heart for honey words to sweeten his temper in the morning. Knowing that her art lay more in storytelling than in pleading or flattery, she opened her lips and whispered, "Merciful Allah sees me and knows me, small as I am. Perhaps Allah, who writes the story of every man's life from its first letter to its last full stop, will grant me opportunity to tell Shahryar one more story and delight his heart with one more tale." So saying, she closed her eyes and slept, as beautiful as a frost-covered reed floating on a river. The next morning King Shahryar, floating in the slack water between the ebb tide of sleep and the flow tide of waking, grumbled, "Another day of listening to greedy merchants slandering each other. They expect me to make judgments on who owns a camel and who overcharged for a cow. The world is as full of greed, Scheherazade, as a duck egg is full of duck. I go to the audience chamber each day, and my heart drops lower and lower like a bucket in a well, down, down, down. Greed, greed, greed." "Would it raise your heart a little then, my melancholy and overburdened lord, to hear a story of a dreadful old miser who lived in Cairo once and suffered fittingly for his meanness?" The king was instantly awake. "But it's morning. I missed my story," he said in astonishment. "I lay down yesterday evening because my head ached, and I slept right through your story." "Ah, well, shall I tell it to you tonight, O bright and inexhaustible king?" said Scheherazade. "Oh, first I shall hear the story of the miser. Tell the other tomorrow." So, giving thanks to Allah, Scheherazade helped the king to dress and brushed his hair, which in her eyes seemed as dark and soft as the black swans winter down on the palace lake. "There was once a chemist in Cairo," said Scheherazade that night, "who was almost as famous for his wealth as he was for his meanness. They said of Abu Qasim that he was born with arms too short, they never did reach his pockets. What is money for but for spending and giving to those who have none? But Abu Qasim buried his money as though it would grow, and hid it in drawers as though it would perfume his clothes. But thanks to his miserliness, his clothes were not perfumed at all. Far from it. He patched the same trousers and bathed in his shirt rather than send it to the laundry. And his shoes were quite the surest sign of penny pinching. For 20 years he wore the same shoes. Holes in them were patched so often and so cheaply with strips of leather tacked on with round-headed nails that his feet looked like 2 armadillos. The soles were as thick as the skull of a rhinoceros, and Abu Qasim's shoes became a byword in the houses and halls of Cairo. People would say, "This soup is as thick as Abu Qasim's left shoe," and "My mother-in-law's cakes are as heavy as Abu Qasim's clogs," or "This egg smells as bad as Abu Qasim's right boot," or "That joke is as old as Abu Qasim's slippers." In short, all Cairo was well acquainted with Abu Qasim's shoes and the reason for their extraordinary size and weight. On one particularly lovely day, when the sun reminded Qasim of a big golden coin and every jingling camel's harness put him in mind of moneybags, he decided to take his yearly Turkish bath. Leaving his shoes on the step and his robe with the cashier, he allowed the Hammam masseurs to sweat him and scrape him and soak him and wash him and dry him and perfume him. Lesser men would have shrunk from the task, but the masseurs at the Turkish bath prided themselves on achieving the impossible. Abu Qasim came up almost spotless. In the meantime, a wealthy merchant, before even his caravan was unloaded, refreshed himself after a long and weary journey with a visit to the Turkish baths. He left his slippers on the step and said to the cashier at the door, "You will frighten your customers away if you leave those horrible slippers of Abu Qasim's on the porch. I shan't share a bath with that man. Put me in another." The hammam attendant agreed, ran outside, and picking up Qasim's stinking shoes with a long pole, deposited them out of sight in a corner of the porch. Consequently, Abu Qasim, on finishing his Turkish bath, came outside to find no shoes on the step except the merchant's handsome silk slippers soled with calfskin. "A miracle!" he exclaimed. "Allah knew that I have always intended to buy shoes like these when I could afford it, and He has worked a transformation. What a saving of money!" They fitted exactly, and he pattered off home and surprised his cook, who could usually hear him clattering all the way up the street. When the merchant could not find his own slippers, his nose told him that Abu Qasim's shoes were still in the porch, and he rooted them out. "Now I know how that rascal Cassim made his fortune," he shouted, "stealing other people's property." And he called all his camel drivers and servants from his caravan, and they marched off in a band to Abu Qasim's chemist shop. There they broke down the door, seized the dumbfounded miser by the scruff of his scruffy neck, and beat him to the floor. The police were called, and Abu Qasim had to pay a large bribe to keep the matter out of the courts. "And you can have back your detestable shoes," said the merchant, parting, and threw them at Abu Qasim's head. "This is entirely your doing," Qasim whispered accusingly at the fuming old shoes. The shoes did not defend themselves, so he picked them up and threw them 1, 2, with all his strength over the garden wall. They hit an old lady who was passing and crushed her like a biscuit. Her relatives wailed and ranted and called out, "Murder! Murder!" until the police arrived. Examining the scene of the crime, they found Abu Qasim's famous footwear, and when Qasim went to his window to discover the reason for the commotion outside, he was hauled over the sill and dragged off to prison in chains. The relatives of the old lady demanded the death of Qasim, but a law peculiar to Cairo fixed the value of a life at 20,000 dinars, and Abu Qasim was able to escape hanging by paying this to the relatives. Parting with 20,000 dinars was as painful to Abu Qasim as 20,000 wasp stings. He howled with misery and kicked his ancient slippers round the house until his feet bled. Then he took them to the Nile and dropped them in, hoping never to lay eyes on them again. They floated down the river, reeking and fuming, and the fish rolled over and died. Finally, the shoes caught in the nets of a fisherman, an ox of a man who, single-handed, could haul in a net full of tuna fish. The nails in Abu Qasim's shoes snagged and tore the twine, and the weight of them stretched the mesh all out of shape, so that the net was entirely ruined by the time the fisherman dragged the slippers ashore. 10,000 curses on that miserable dog, Abu Qasim! I would know these legendary monstrosities anywhere. When the fisherman squeezed his huge body through the door of the chemist shop, Abu Qasim recognized his shoes dripping in the great paw-like hands. There is no escaping the fate Allah sends. The fisherman tenderized Qasim as he tenderized squid and octopus on the rocks beside the Nile. As a parting gesture, he threw the awful footwear against the rows of shelves, smashing all the chemist's stocks of precious minerals and herbs. "Oh, Allah, take vengeance on you, contemptible objects!" Qasim sobbed, crawling out into his garden with the shoes in a trowel. Although it was late evening and already dark, he dug a large hole and buried the disreputable shoes out of all harm's way. But his neighbors, watching from the bedroom window, saw Abu Qasim digging in his garden in the dark, and, knowing his reputation as a miser, thought he must be burying treasure. "That old miser, Abu Qasim, has run out of floorboards to hide his money under. He digs holes in the garden now and buries it there." Abu Qasim woke to find all manner of people digging furiously in his garden, flinging his herb garden in spadefuls over the wall. Small boys were shaking earth through metal sieves, and metal diviners with bent twigs in their hands were walking up and down his melon beds. No one believed him when he shouted from the window that he had only been burying his shoes, and he had to dig them up again to prove his story, and then pay everyone in the garden, some 154 spade owners, a piece of gold to go away. "I have to be rid of these appalling objects which are a blight on my happiness and a danger to my life," he grizzled. And he walked many miles into the countryside before finding a canal and throwing the shoes into a weir-pool. Unfortunately, on the other side of the sluices was a mill whose wheel was driven by the weir. The antique shoes, which, as it has been told you, had soles mended to the thickness of a rhinoceros's skull, caught in the mill wheel paddles, and shearing all the gears, brought the mill to a violent halt. Investigating, the miller instantly recognized the infamous slippers of Abu Qasim. You have seen the size of a miller's shoulders, have you not? His strength comes from lifting sacks of wheat grain all day long. When the miller found Abu Qasim, he picked him up like a sack of grain and flung him into the mill pond. Abu stayed there until the police arrived. Even after paying for the damage to the mill, Abu Qasim was obliged to pay out the last of his money as a bribe to the police before he was set free. His shoes were, of course, returned to him at the prison gate. "Ill-omened, everlasting slippers, cause of all my misfortunes, will you kick me all the way to my grave?" Blubbering and babbling, he ran all the way to the High Court, presented himself at the Qadi's bench, waving the shoes above his head in a state of hysteria. "In front of witnesses," Abu Qasim cried. "Let it be known in all regions of the Nile. I accuse my boots of malice and conspiracy. I hereby disown them. From this day forwards I will have nothing to do with shoes, of any kind whatsoever. Abu Qasim no longer owns any slippers. Abu Qasim no longer owns any money. But what of that? I beg your worships not to hold Abu Qasim responsible for anything shoes may do in the future." And he dropped the shoes in the middle of the court and ran out in his bare feet, cursing the whole tribe and family of shoes, while behind him in the courtroom the Qadi laughed so much that he fell off his judgment bench. While Scheherazade was telling the tale of the everlasting shoes, her husband King Shahryar turned his back on her. His face was buried in a pillow, and his shoulders jerked up and down. Anyone who had not lived in the royal palace, as gloomy a place as the bottom of a poisoned well, anyone who had not lived in Sasan's royal city for those 3 sad years, might have thought that the king was laughing. But Scheherazade wisely said, "I am presumptuous, my stern and sober husband, to weave stories out of such light and worthless stuff. Let me redeem a little honor in your beloved eyes, and tell you a story that is full of heroism, wisdom, and merit. It is the story of the keys of destiny." "Tomorrow, Scheherazade, tomorrow," said the king, emerging from his pillow. "I'm quite tired out with laughing, with listening, I think I shall sleep now." And just as a tropical sun sets in the blink of an eye, so King Shahryar, the sunshine of all Sasan, fell asleep during the speaking of his own full stop. Chapter 10. The Keys of Destiny. "Without doubt you will have heard," said Scheherazade the next night, "of the Sultan Muhammad ibn Thawlan, who is remembered for the outstanding mercy and the justice of his rule over Egypt. When he came to the throne, he said, 'Open the doors of the servants' quarters. If I find that anyone there is working wearily for a small wage, I will lessen his work and increase his wages. Open the exchequer door. If I find that any tax collector has been taking more than the poor people can afford, I will give back the money and beat the tax collector. Open all the stable doors. If I find that animals are spending their old age doing heavy work, I will turn them out to grass and beat the owners. Lastly, open all the prison doors. If I find that my father imprisoned anyone unjustly, I will free him and make his life as pleasant as it has been miserable.' Now the prisons were full of merchants who had been robbed of everything by Muhammad's father. They were full of poets whose verses had failed to please Muhammad's father. They were full of mothers who had refused to sell their daughters to Muhammad's father for his harem. And there was also one old man who had lain so long in the deepest cell that no guard at the prison could remember his crime. This old man was carried to the royal audience chamber and laid at the feet of Sultan Muhammad. Now outwardly the young sultan was very like his father, though their inner hearts were as different as a butterfly is different from its caterpillar or chrysalis. The old man looked up at Muhammad through drooping eyelids and said, 'The answer is still no, O Sultan Thawlan. Let my magic book lie in your treasure chest until the moths eat every page. I will not translate it.' The young sultan called for a feather bed to be brought to the audience chamber, and for a shawl of white lamb's wool to wrap around the old man's shoulders. While this was done, Muhammad went to his father's treasure chest and searched until he found a chest wrought in solid gold, which held a little red earth and a strange, wonderful book written in gilt letters on the purple-stained skin of a gazelle. But though Muhammad knew many languages, and his wazir more, the book's language was beyond their understanding. He took the book back to the audience chamber and placed it in the old man's hands. 'I am my father's son, but I weep for the thing that he has done to you. I do not wish to keep anything that rightly belongs to another man. If this book were the key to all the treasures of the earth, I would give it back to you, its rightful owner. But if you tell me no other secret, old man, tell me your name and the circumstances of your sad life.' The old man wept openly and turned the palms of his hands towards heaven. 'O Allah, who can make both a man and break him like a twig? I have lain in prison for 40 years, but you have released me to die in the sunlight.' And then he turned to the Sultan. 'Dear master, I will tell to a good man what I would not tell to a cruel one. I am Hassan Abdallah, son of Al-Ashar, and from this day forward, I want you to have the manuscript. It is the only thing I have left of my journey to Iram, the mysterious city of many columns.' My father was rich, and sent me to the most exquisite schools so that I was able to marry well. But soon after my wedding, my father and his whole fleet of merchant ships were swallowed to the very stomach of the sea. The family was ruined. My wife and I and my little children lived on the edge of starvation. One day I went out to sell my wife's last beautiful dress to buy bread for the children, when a rich sheik on a red camel jumped down in front of me. "Hassan, Abdullah, son of Al-Ashar, I've come to Cairo looking for you." I thought of the food we ought to offer any guest to our house, and thought for a moment of pretending not to be Hassan Abdallah. "Clearly, sir, you have not heard of the changes to our circumstances. The house of Abdallah holds only one starving man and his starving wife and children." But he insisted on coming to the house, and I had to pretend that he was welcome. My wife said, "A stranger is the guest of Allah. He must be fed, even if we have to give him our children's food." The sheik overheard her, however, and took out 10 gold coins. "Take this, Hassan Abdallah, and buy everything you need for a good family meal. Here, I kiss you as a brother so that you cannot refuse my gift." The mysterious sheik, who never explained how he knew of my family, stayed on in our little home for 2 weeks. Every day he gave us 10 gold coins, so that slowly health and happiness returned to the household. My children were well fed, and we thanked Allah for the sending of such a generous guest. But after 16 days, the sheik leaned towards me during dinner and said laughingly, "Are you willing to sell yourself to me, Hassan Abdallah?" "I and everyone in my house belongs to you," I said, "so it must be between host and guest." "Oh, yes," said the sheik, "but would you sell me your life for 1,500 dinars to provide a secure future for your wife and children?" He was serious. My wife knew it, and began to cry. "No, we shall sell the house and repay the money you have given us, but don't talk of taking my husband's life," she begged. The sheik tried to calm her. "I simply need a companion, my dear lady, for a rather long journey I'm planning. I heard tell of the qualities of Hassan Abdallah and his recent hardships, and I am here to solve both our problems." My heart was silent inside me and would not tell me the right path to take, so I accepted the money and immediately became the property of the mysterious sheik. The next day we went to the camel market and equipped ourselves for a desert journey. The rising and falling waves of desert sand dunes washed away 10 scorching days. The white hammer of the sun beat on my head until time itself was beaten out of shape. On the 11th morning we reached the edge of a plain white sand, white like a plate of salt into which Allah himself might dip his bread. In the middle of the plain stood a pillar of granite, taller than any columns supporting the great palace of Al-Mutawakkil in Baghdad, taller than any living tree. On top of it stood a copper statue of a boy with one hand stretched out, and on each of his 5 fingers hung a heavy key. The first one was of gold, the second silver, the third copper, the 4th iron, and the 5th lead. The sheik dismounted and unpacked a bow and a quiver of copper arrows. "You're a fine archer, Hassan Abdallah. Shoot down those keys for me, will you?" To tell the truth, I was pleased to show my skill with a bow. With 4 shots, I tumbled 4 of the keys from the 5 fingers of the statue. The keys seemed to fall slowly, as coins fall through water, and hit the ground without noise. The sheik, however, had laid himself down and was eating an orange, showing no great interest in the keys. "Run and fetch them for me, will you, young Hassan?" he said. I gathered up the keys from the base of the pillar like a playful dog fetching back a stick from my master. Oh, my bitter soul! Why was I not warned? Why was I such an eager puppet on the hand of that mysterious sheik? "You have pleased me a great deal," the sheik said, as I hurried back like a jailer rattling the keys. "You have brought your freedom by this fine display of archery, and as a token of my thanks for your pleasant company, I would like you to keep the gold and silver keys for yourself." I was overcome. I held out the iron and lead keys. It seemed to me that he snatched them with great eagerness, and I hurried to fit another arrow to the bow to shoot down the 5th copper key. "What are you doing, donkey, son of a fool? Leave the copper one." He knocked the arrow from the bow, and it stuck in my foot, making a deep, painful wound. Remembering all his kindness to me and my family, I stuck my 2 keys through my belt, as he did with his, and we remounted. Allah sends good days and bad days. I thought that the days which followed were the result of a little bad luck. Any wound can become infected. Any foot can pain its owner. Judge me. Would I not have jumped from the highest cliff into the deepest river had I known what lay ahead? As the pain in my foot got worse, I began to be feverish and developed a great thirst. So when we came to a grassy place spread with fruit-bearing trees, I climbed down painfully from my camel and limped across to sink my teeth in the peach-colored, plush-skinned fruit. With my jaws at full stretch and my tongue pressed against the skin, my teeth fastened in the fruit and would not cut through it, nor could they be drawn out. I could barely breathe, for the fruit fitted my mouth as an egg fits an egg cup, and I could not swallow, for my tongue was out of use. By wild arm-waving, I tried to tell the sheik that I was drowning, and he finally came walking across at a slow pace. "You've got that stuck in there, brother," he said from the seat of his great wisdom. And although he wrestled with my head under his arm, the fruit would not come out. He assured me that there was nothing to worry about and broke a twig off the overhanging tree. It was crawling with ants. As I fell back, exhausted with my efforts to breathe, chew, or swallow, he took several of these ants on to the fruit. "There," said my companion, "did I not tell you there was no need to roll your eyes and thrash about so excessively? The ants will soon eat the fruit away." "Ah!" I said. "Oh, how soon? Ah, no more than 3 days, I should say." And that is why, good master, the story of my miserable life includes 3 pages in which I lay on my back in a field, aching with hunger and thirst, with my mouth full of fruit and ants. My companion sat alongside me, giving me a commentary on the progress of the ants. When, after 3 days, the fruit core broke between my teeth, my first words were, "Water, for the love of Allah!" But in the course of waiting, my companion had drunk both the water in his goatskin and in mine. "Here I am, delaying my journey for 3 days to take care of you. You surely didn't expect me to go thirsty while I sat," he said reproachfully. Remembering his kindness to my family, I saw that he was in the right. When we passed a stream that afternoon, you can imagine how my heart flew to the cool, sweet water, though my wounded foot carried me there slowly. I gulped it deeply down, but my friend felt no need to refresh himself. Consequently, he was not alarmed for his health when, a little farther up the stream, we found a dead sheep lying in the water. I soon felt the effects of drinking at the polluted stream, as violent pains tore at my insides. The river water might have been acid, for it burned away inside me until the bumping of the camel was almost too much to bear. "Your groaning is quite irritating, my friend," said the sheik. "You should try to keep more fit, and then you would not be so prone to these little ailments." Leaning on one stirrup, only because of my swollen foot, my jaws still aching, I bumped along in agony behind my friend, and remembering his kindness to me and my family, tried not to groan too often. The day cooled like an old fever, and I thanked Allah for sending the night so that I could sleep. "Before you sleep, O Hassan Abdallah," said my friend, just as I slid my poor body into the soothing water of sleep, "climb that hill over there and say evening prayers for us both." "Oh, considerate sheik, I don't think I am able to do your bidding, what with the pain in my stomach and my bad foot." But he reminded me of the kindness he had done me and my family, and I was ashamed. As I hopped toward the steep hillside covered with thorn bushes, he called after me, "Do not be tempted to sleep while you are on the hill. The night mists that settle over it tend to damage a man's health." I considered the state of my health often on that evening climb, clutching my stomach as I limped from sharp rock to thorn bush, from squeezing foothold to trailing cactus. A wind as sharp as a Berber's sword sliced over the hilltop as I stood and said my prayer. A full moon was shining directly in my face, and when I looked back to our encampment, our friend was tracing the long, long shadow of the moon cast behind me into the valley. Turning out of the wind, I felt the full weight of my weariness, as the swimmer climbing ashore feels the full weight of his body. I stretched out on a flat rock, thinking to rest myself before climbing down, but sleep crept in at my ears and coiled itself around my brain. It took away my pain and wiped from my memory the sheik's warning, "Do not be tempted to sleep while you are on the hill." "Scheherazade," said King Shahryar, holding up one hand, "the weariness of Hassan Abdallah has crept into my ears along with the words of your story. I must sleep an hour or two before morning. You may return to your own room or sleep here as you wish." "And tomorrow, if you permit it, my bright-eyed lord," said Scheherazade, "I will reveal the secret properties of those 5 keys in the White Desert." The king patted her hand in agreement. Scheherazade did not return to her room. She curled up in the angle of the king's arm and watched sleep settle on him like dew on a wide-petaled flower. Chapter 11. The Keys of Destiny, the City of Many Columns. The young and noble Sultan Muhammad was listening so closely to the old man's story that he almost forgot the beautiful book held between his hands, written in letters of gold on the purple-stained skin of a gazelle. Old Hassan Abdallah reached out and fingered the gilt-edged pages before returning to his story. When I woke up long before morning, the dank fog smothering the hilltop hid from me at first the full horror of what had happened. I only knew that my arms, legs, and head were heavy past lifting. When the chilly rheumatic mist rolled back, the moon stood over me severely, and I saw that my body had swollen to twice its normal size. My arms were as thick as an elephant's legs, and my mountainous stomach cut me off from all sight of my feet, though I could feel that they had burst out of their sandals. My head was bloated to the size of a wineskin, and indeed, I slopped about as though I had been filled to bursting with gallons of liquid. Unable to wave or attract my friend's attention, I came down the hillside in the only way I could, rolling my grotesque hippopotamus of a body over and over down the slope. Thorn bushes punctured me, cactus plants clung to me, jutting rocks squelched me. Gathering speed and bouncing faster and faster, I fell down the hill. I slopped to a halt at my friend's feet. I secretly hoped I might be dead, but Allah disappointed me. Some of the thorns had pricked holes large enough to let out a yellowish water, and my kind friend helped to deflate me by drawing his knife and plunging it into me in several places. "I did warn you, friend," he said. "It seems to me that you are too lazy to take a friend's good advice." When my body had emptied itself, my skin flapped around my bones like clothes on a clothes horse, but my friend hardly noticed my changed appearance, for he was busily lighting a fire inside a shape marked on the ground. It was the shape of my shadow thrown by the moon when I was standing on the hilltop. Beside the fire, the mysterious sheik dug a neat square hole, down and down, until he uncovered the book you hold in your hands. Then, in a little metal basin over the fire, he heated a phial of phoenix blood and held the book inside the wreaths of pink smoke which filled the air. "The lead key of wisdom has taught me the way here and the dangers of the journey," said the sheik. "Now this magic book will show us the way to a place more wonderful than living man has ever visited, Imram, city of many columns." "Oh, forgive your worthless slave. I am filled with happiness to know that you will find so agreeable a place. But I have seen many cities and many columns, and at this moment I wish only to see my wife and children again. Won't you go on alone?" "Ungrateful child, born on a raining Wednesday, the city of many columns holds more wealth than the desert holds sand. Do me the service of shooting that small serpent behind you, and bring me its heart without another word." And he returned to reading the magic book by the light of the phoenix blood smoke. Having a great fear of snakes, I turned to snatch up the bow and arrow from our luggage. There, twisting like a whirlwind up into the sky, its fangs flickering like lightning far above me, a monster serpent drew itself up into the night sky. Its tail lashed forward and encircled me, leaving my hands time to fire only one arrow. The dying creature thrashed me against the ground as it writhed blackly along the earth. And now others appeared from every shadow and tree. The valley was infested with giant serpents. Calling on Allah to save me, I cut out the serpent's heart and ran with it to the sheikh, who placed it in a new basin over the fire and boiled it down to a liquid. "Has your heart changed in the matter of turning back?" he asked me. "Oh, sweetest friend, riches do not interest me, but save us from this terrible snake fic if you have any magic in you," I begged. He took off his robe and instructed me to rub the liquid into his shoulder blades. I rubbed until 2 swellings appeared. Then his skin opened and 2 wings sprang up, which grew and grew until they trailed on the ground. As the serpents plaited themselves around our camp, my friend rose up into the air, beating his wings. Weak as I was, I clung to his legs, and so we flew out of the valley and onto a great plain. Against the horizon stood Imram, city of many columns, behind a wall of blue crystal. The sand of the whole plain was powdered gold. I have seen beauty in the 10 scales of a flying fish's wing, but here beauty stretched from a liquid horizon of aquamarine to another of flexing copper, and made the diaphragm of the sky pant with ecstasy. The bricks of the city wall were alternate silver and gold, and in the wall were 7 gates, one of ruby, one of emerald, one of agate, one of coral, one of jasper, one of silver, and one of gold. Landing in front of the golden gate, my friend couched his wings, and we passed through into the city. Every building was a palace whose walls were alabaster, whose fountains ran with milk, and whose window arches were inlaid with porphyry. But at the high heart of the city stood the greatest palace of all, whose terraces were supported by 1,001 columns of red gold, terraces hung with enchanted flowers, whose perfume was never spent, and which leached drops of amber that altered as they fell into tear-shaped pearls. In the inner courtyard of the palace, a magic garden planted in beds of musk was watered by 3 rivers, one of wine, one of honey, and one of rose water. But at the high heart of the garden stood a pavilion carved from a single emerald, shading a throne of gold and ruby, and at the high heart of the throne stood a small golden chest filled with red powder to the brim. The old man in the audience chamber of Sultan Muhammad fingered the golden chest from which the young sultan had taken the magic book. The packet of red powder in it was the last of the red sulphur, treasure of Imram, city of many columns. My friend, the mysterious sheikh, leapt and danced around the pavilion in a way hardly befitting for a believer. He whirled me round, despite my reminding him of the pain in my foot, stomach, and various stab wounds, and asked if I was not the happiest man in Cairo. "Oh, sir," I said, scooping up handfuls of pearls and sapphires from the flower beds and winding them into the folds of my turban, "the hour that returns me to Cairo will indeed make me happy, but I beg your leave to feel a little unwell at present, owing to the sorry state of my poor body. But wait until my wife and children see these." He knocked the jewels out of my hands and emptied my turban. "Son of a plank! Did you steal your brains from a table? Did you not know that death searches those who leave the city, and if she finds a single jewel, even so much as a flake of crystal, she will swallow us up? Leave it. It is trash. But we can take this, and 1 grain of red sulphur will transform any metal into gold. It will turn a stone into a diamond, a drop of blood into a ruby. Half of this is yours. With a palmful of this powder a man could buy Baghdad and the earth beneath it. With a pinch of this a man could buy the most beautiful wife in all the believing world and keep her love for half a day. With a handful of this... But shall I live to see you so rich, master? I would like nothing more, but I begin to doubt it, since my life runs out through so many holes that I am almost too downhearted to breathe." "Ungrateful son of a whimpering ferret! Did you shoot down the copper key of death in the White Desert? No! I promise you, as a man of magic, Hassan Abdallah, you will live to a great age and be as rich as I am." Remembering his kindness to me and my family, I was ashamed of myself and begged to be allowed to cling to his feet when he flew out of Iram, city of many columns. We flew over the great plain of powdered gold, over our camels in the valley of giant snakes, over the hill covered with thorn bushes, over the polluted stream of cool water, over the orchard of jaw-breaking fruit, over the white desert where the copper key of death still hung from the finger of the copper statue. "Now that our journey is ending," I said, "will you not tell me the fates attached to the other keys? I know that lead brought you wisdom, but what did the iron key bring you?" "Wealth, of course," he laughed. "Wealth and happiness." Then may I beg you to tell me what lovely fate you gave me when you so kindly let me keep the gold and silver keys which I have hung around my neck?" "Allah knows all," he said. And as we arrived at the gates of Cairo, "Allah and the magic book and I alone know the secrets of the keys of destiny. When I die, Hassan Abdallah, I promise that you may have the magic book and the phial of phoenix blood. In the meantime, we shall live here in unimagined wealth. Now be content, as all believers must be content." No man in Araby was more happy than my wise, successful friend. No man in Araby more miserable than I, Hassan Abdallah. For let me tell you what misfortune awaited me in Cairo. From the gate I hired a litter to carry me home, thinking of the joy and commotion I would cause at the little house. But I found the door open to the cats and dogs of the street, and the roof open to the birds of the sky. My house was an empty ruin, with less life inside it than a snail shell that the thrushes have broken open. I suppose that death came and filled my empty place at table after I had gone, and carried off my dearest people. With the riches provided by the red sulphur, the sheik and I built 2 palaces on the edge of Sultan Thalin's kingdom. The walls were of bone china, and the roofs of transparent sky-blue sapphire, so there seemed to be no roof at all. The day pavilions in the perfumed gardens were tents of grey silk, shot with gold fibers and embroidered with texts of poetry. Deer browsed on lawns of chamomile. Guests of every rank and nationality were invited to the sheik's palace, given their heart's desire, and could stay for as long as they wished. A party began on the day when his palace doors opened, and lasted for 12 years. In all that time I neither took pleasure in a song nor smiled the smile of a happy man. I kept to the inner rooms of my empty palace and poisoned the scented air with sighs and groans. The pain of my wounds never left me, and my heart seemed like the fruit of that evil orchard, eaten away by little by the small ants of misery. My friend criticized me for taking so little delight in the wealth he had brought me, but he was kind enough to send for medicines from China and the islands of knowledge beyond Mesopotamia, and he brought me beautiful slaves at every slave market, hoping to make me sick with love, the sickness which drives out all other sicknesses. But although he was kind, I felt better when he was in his palace and I was in mine, for he could not help but laugh continually and slap my bony back, saying, "Is life not the greatest of all his inventions? Is any man happier than I? Send him to me, and I will buy his weight of happiness and put it in my cellars for the mice to eat. Hassan Abdallah, even the mice in my palace must be happy, for I have the iron key of happiness and wealth." I asked him if his grains of red sulphur could buy him 1 hour more of life, but he only laughed hugely and slapped my bony back again. On one such cheerful visit, he told me news which shook my hollow chest as the wind shakes a sail, but he laughed as he told me, "That old rascal Sultan Thailand has fixed his greedy eyes on our 2 palaces. He plans to attack and to take them for himself, for Cairo is a flea circus alongside the carnival I have begun here with my red sulphur. We shall send him back like a flea to his flea circus, shall we not, Hassan Abdallah?" And he seemed so pleased with his joke that he laughed and laughed until he had to sit down, and he still laughed and laughed until he had to lie down, and still he laughed and laughed until he had to be buried because he was stone dead. Allah send me as happy a death, but alas, I did not keep the iron key of happiness and wealth. I arranged a funeral for my friend, more splendid than any ever seen before or since. There are surely men in your kingdom now who remember the feasts and processions at the funeral of the Sheik of Imram. And I buried with him the keys he wore round his neck, the iron and lead keys of wisdom and happiness. As soon as the festivities ended, I went to the Sheik's palace and sought out the magic book. The fire, the phoenix blood, the golden letters on purple-stained vellum, and the pink smoke, I remember them all when I found them on the onyx floor of the palace. They revealed to me the directions to the city of Iram, the secret of flight and wing growth, the truth concerning the keys of destiny. The iron key opens all doors to happiness and wealth, the lead key to all wisdom and health, the copper key opens the doors of death, the silver key brings suffering and pain, and gold unlocks all misery and shame. The sheik, when he bought my life for 1,500 dinars, was buying himself a slave to carry the keys of misery and suffering, and I had worn their gold and silver round my neck for 12 long years. Oh, how I clawed them from my neck! I put them together in the tin basin over the fire and watched the metal fusing together. Some of my pain left me at once. But sometimes 1 minute decides the fate of a man. As the gold and silver melted and ran together, Sultan Thailand soldiers stormed the palace. They took the gold and leaf from the walls and the platinum nails from the floorboards and every valuable thing between. They scattered my magic fire and set alight the gray silk tents shot with gold threads. Both palaces, built from the riches of Iran, were burnt to the ground, and Sultan Thailand captured both me and the magic book and the last of the red sulphur in its chest of wrought gold. The old man held the precious box in his arms again after 40 years and wept freely over it. "My father could not understand the mystical writing in the magic book and commanded you to translate it. Am I right, Hassan Abdallah?" said the young sultan. "Forgive me if I was wrong, O son of your father, but with the wealth of the city of Iram, the sultan your father would have raised an army to crush all Arabia under his foot. Without wisdom, he placed no value on the red sulphur, thinking it was a little dirty sand in the bottom of the chest. But he tortured me daily to find out the meaning of the magic book, then threw me into his deepest prison and in time forgot. But Allah does not forget." "No, indeed, old man," said the sultan. "I shall use the last of the red sulphur to build you a country house and keep you in comfort. But all the red sulphur in Iram and elsewhere cannot replace your 40 years, nor your wife and children." "On that subject I have something to say, if a worthless woman may speak in the presence of the great Sultan Mohammed." An old lady, dressed in prison clothes, stepped forward from the crowd of prisoners Sultan Mohammed had released along with Hassan Abdallah. "I am one of the many mothers whom Sultan Thailand imprisoned when we would not sell our daughters to be wives in his harem. I sent my children out of the country to Baghdad and accepted my fate. My husband, you see, was traveling when the Sultan came to me offering gold for my oldest girl child. I thought until this day that my husband had died on this dangerous journey in the company of the mysterious sheikh who bought my beloved's life for 1,500 dinars. But today I see that I am not a widow, and I can tell you, Hassan Abdallah, that our children are safe in Baghdad, if Allah is just." So Hassan Abdallah and his old wife were reunited. But such was the happiness of old Hassan that he let loose a flurry of tears and fell at the feet of the young sultan. "Oh, master, when I tell you the last and terrible secret I kept from your father, you will undoubtedly throw us again into the deepest cell of your deepest prison. But let it be one cell this time, so that my wife and I may be together until death frees us from all imprisonment." "Never, Hassan Abdallah," said the sultan, amazed that Hassan could still think him so cruel. "Truth is owed only to those whose hearts are strong enough to hold it." "The soldiers of Thalon, your father, like dogs joyfully fetching back a stick, brought him the little tin basin containing the gold and silver keys. He asked me what they would open to him, but I refused to speak. In the hope of finding the treasure chest they fitted, your father kept the keys of misery and suffering close by him. For all I know, they were with him to the hour of his death. Can you forgive me for the years of suffering and unhappiness I caused your glorious father?" The thoughts of the young sultan did not show in his face, but he kept his promise to Hassan Abdallah and built him and his wife a fine house on the outskirts of Cairo. His children returned home with children of their own. Can a river forget its source, or a sunbeam forget the sun? Can the tail of the snake forget the head that went before it? Can a man forget his father? The young Sultan Muhammad did not forget Thalon his father, but the stuff of his memories, that is a secret Allah and the Sultan alone knew.